We've been exploring this, we've been doing this series exploring the mind-turning reflections, sometimes called the Four Reminders. So I'll just quickly summarise what they are, the four of them, and then I'll locate us with what we're looking at this week. Welcome. There should be some spaces for you. How many of you are there? Just four of you, okay. There should be some spaces by the door. I'll let you take charge. So yeah, the four mind-turning reflections are firstly the fact that life is really precious, the fact that we have the opportunity to practice the Dharma, to be alive, let alone practice the Dharma, is a rare thing. It's a precious thing. And that exists kind of in a pair, if you like, with the second reflection, which is that it is also a fleeting thing, that life and all things and the conditions within life are unpredictable and impermanent. So life is not only precious, but it's fleeting as well. And so those two reflections together help us to build that desire to kind of seize the day and make the most of it. The reflection we're going to look at more tonight is karma. We're going to look at what the Buddhist tradition means when it talks about karma, which is basically reflecting on the fact that actions have consequences. What we do matters. So that's what we'll explore for the rest of the evening. And then that's paired with a reflection on the fact that life in the world, if you like, that we usually hitch our faith on, the sort of, the job, the partner, the approval of someone, the satisfaction of a nice meal, all the kind of normal things that we spend most of our life kind of trying to move towards, will let us down. All of that will let us down. It's not. It doesn't work to provide the lasting satisfaction that we, on some deep level, assume it is, hope it will. There's the connection. I'll talk a little bit about the connection between those two as well, because I think it's quite interesting. So really, this is in a way these are they're just the facts of life from a Buddhist perspective, where we're just looking at what it fundamentally is, and in a way, they're not. None of them should be too controversial. It should be quite clear that these things are true, and we're just trying to, by reflecting on them, see them more deeply. So, to a certain extent, it's a kind of wisdom practice, where if we could really see the truth of these things, that would be, that might help us to sort of see through some of the delusion that we live our life within. But rather than an advanced practice, and sort of wisdom practice is often seen as something that happens a bit further down the Buddhist path, where these reflections come from in the Tibetan tradition is as the foundation. It's like the first thing. It happens even before we decide that we're going to try and practice. It's like there's a moment where we decide we're going to try and practice, and then there's a sort of gradual path of things that we can do to practice the Dharma. This comes before we even decide. It's like these reflections are a way of getting us to decide to try and practice and try and sort of change our minds and the way that we experience the world. And we need to keep remembering them. So they're reminders. They're also the four reminders. So they're reminders of how things really are, so that we keep that motivation, that kind of aliveness. It's so easy just to kind of go to sleep in our life, and these are they can keep waking us up to what's important. So I'm going to talk a bit more about. I'm mainly going to focus on this third of these three reflections: the fact that actions have consequences, particularly in terms of karma. But I'll just zoom slightly out to place karma in its context before we kind of experiment a little bit and see if we can notice how karma works. So the Buddha's sort of fundamental teaching, his fundamental sort of way of describing the reality that he saw. When he became a Buddha, he saw things as they really are, which is it's a bit of a stock phrase, isn't it? To see things as they really are, but to sort of see, things as they are. What the way he described what that was that he saw that all things arose, all phenomena arise in dependence upon conditions. So there's a set of conditions, and a sort of, in a way, you can sort of never-ending set of conditions, sort of web of different things that mean that a particular thing can come into being. So, speaking about myself, I relied on my dad and my mum, and I relied on them, all the different circumstances that led to them meeting. I rely on the fact that I've had food and shelter and so on, and the way that I sort of am has been the product of lots of other people that I've met and things I've learned, etc., etc. So there's a whole web of conditions that bring something into being, and if those conditions were to cease to be, certain ones, such as the fact that I have food and shelter and warmth and air to breathe and so on, if they were to cease to be, then I would cease to be. So things arise in dependence of conditions and cease when those conditions cease. So in a way that seems fairly straightforward, a description of reality, but it's striking that what the Buddha's pointing out is he's trying to look for something that is completely universal. Because when we ask the question, what is true, we can have all sorts of we can have sort of assumptions. We can say, well, it's true that I am here in the London Buddhist Centre Shrine Room. It's true that I brushed my teeth this morning. It's true, in a way, we're looking for something somehow much more universal than that, much more fundamental than that. And what he's saying is that the way things come into being isn't random. So it's not just complete fluke. There are all these conditions that lead, in a way, predictably, if we could but see all those conditions, it's not random. They lead to something. Something emerges out of them. But it's also not fated. It's not that it was always going to be the way that it is. There's a sense that there are these sort of natural laws in process that you, like, if you input this condition in here, that will have an effect over there, and if you do that, or you change that, or decide to do this instead, it will have consequences. So it's rather looking almost kind of scientifically at how things are functioning. I quite like this idea of it being scientific, in that it's very much based in observation. The Buddha's just looking at the world, now that he's seeing through his practice, now seeing much, much more clearly how things are. He's just observing what he sees and is describing it in the best way that he can. And the downside of calling it scientific is that the usual kind of scope of science is much smaller than what the Buddha was describing. We usually kind of limit our scope to something rather more material, of like physical matter and how it relates to one another and so on. And in a way, the Buddha's exploration of what his witnessing of conditionality expresses itself into all levels of into the different levels of consciousness and into our inner experience much more as well. So we can see conditionality in this way, kind of playing out on all levels, from the way a galaxy sort of forms and collapses into a black hole and so on. We can see that that's happening on the basis of natural laws. Certain conditions come into being, certain conditions go out of being. Right the way down to how a cell operates. Yeah, so we can see that at all levels, but also it's to do with it's us. So the way that we're built up out of all the different conditions of our life, our genetics, our upbringing and the relationships that we've had and how they've affected us, the culture that we've grown up in, even the language that we speak. I unfortunately don't speak another language. Those people I know who do, and I imagine lots of people in this room will speak more than one language. It seems that your kind of your whole being sort of changes if you can communicate in another language. The whole understanding of the world kind of changes with that. So the language that we happen to sort of grow up speaking, that will affect us a lot. The things that happen to us, etc. But the Buddha's particularly interested in how we're shaped, not just by those things, because in a certain sense, we can't do anything about those things. They're the sort of the facts of us. They're what's brought us here. What he's particularly interested in is how we're shaped by what we do. Because that, if you like, is the only bit that we've got control of. What we have control of is what we choose to do. And the Buddhist tradition talks about that in terms of not just physical actions. I choose to walk through the door, I choose to throw a cup, I choose to whatever. But so actions of body, but also actions of speech. So the things that we say, what we say, how we communicate, the tone of our communication, our written communication, even our emojis perhaps, how we sort of relate to one another, their actions. But so are the actions of our mind as well. So if we are going on telling ourselves a story about how we've been really wronged by someone, or how we're brilliant and people underestimate us, or whatever it is that we like to tell ourselves in the privacy of our own mind, that's an action as well. So in a way, in all these different ways, we're acting all the time. And it's that the Buddha is particularly interested in, because that's the thing that we have control over. And this is the realm of karma, really. So after we've had some tea, I'm going to say a lot more about karma and how it works. The sort of what are the natural laws that can be observed that govern how we act. That govern the effects of what our actions are, govern the consequences of our actions. So we'll say more about that. But first, I just wanted to see if we can get a sense of it in experience. There's lots that could be said. There's lots of lists that the Buddhist tradition has as ways of articulating different aspects of karma and so on. And I'll maybe introduce a couple of them after we've had tea. But before that, in a certain sense, karma is really simple. It doesn't need to be something particularly heavy or particularly complex. And I hope I can just see if you can get a sense for yourself of how it works. So let's set up, and we'll just do a short meditation for about 10 minutes or so, and I'll just lead us through a couple of reflections, and we'll see if we can notice this for ourselves. So taking a moment just to settle, as we did before, tuning into your experience in the body. So awareness through the whole body. And particularly sensitive to the heart center, as we were doing just now. Sensitive to how you are right now. Now we're just going to bring to mind a memory as recent as you can find, of a moment where you acted or communicated in a way that was unkind or selfish. So bringing that memory as vividly to mind as possible and seeing if you can stay there. And notice any effect that it has in your experience of the body and the heart center. What effect does it have on your experience of yourself? And what effect does it have on your experience of the world and others? And now letting go of that memory. Just sitting with a broad awareness in the body, the heart center. Now bringing to mind a memory of a time when you were kind or generous. What effect does that have in the body at the heart center? What effect does it have on how you feel about yourself? And your experience of the world and other people. Letting go of that memory too, just sitting with a broad awareness. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left before we break for tea, but before that it would be good just to get into pairs. See if you can pair up with someone that you don't know, if you can, and you can introduce yourself, but then just talk a little bit about that exercise. What happened for you? What did you notice? What was the difference between the two memories and the effects that it had? So you could talk a bit in pairs, and then I'll ring a bell at some point and we can all go have tea, and then after we've had tea I'd like to hear some other reflections from some of you as well. So yeah, let's get into pairs and discuss that exercise. Good. So before we went for tea, we were doing this exercise, trying to see if we can notice the effects of karma in our own experience. So I'd be interested to hear back from a few of you what you noticed when we were doing this exercise. Between the two different memories, what were the first things that you sort of noticed for yourself directly? Yeah.
For me, the contrast was between a sense of safety and unsafety.
Mm-hmm.
So in the negative memory, there was that sense of like my animal body going into like, I'm scared, so I'm going to be nasty, and I don't care what other people feel, like I'm just closing my heart, and also like a loss of awareness of like better options or the things that could be done,
Mm-hmm.
or like how other people are feeling, like very tunnel vision, like I just got to survive kind of reaction. As opposed to the positive memory was like that sense of like, oh yeah, I'm safe, I'm abundant, I can give, I can be open, like that's safe to do that. And the contrast between the two, I was kind of like, well, which one is true, like in life, like are we safe or unsafe? And it felt like a choice. That I, even in the scary situation, I could choose to like ground myself and be like, no, I'm gonna feel safe and I'm gonna respond rather than react. But it was like being aware enough to catch that option.
Great, good, yeah, good. That was very descriptive, and the this sense of when we're acting selfishly or unkindly or something, there's what often results from that. Maybe it leads to it as well, but what certainly results from it is a sense that there's something to defend. We sort of are, our sense of me becomes quite sort of solid, and I feel like I need to protect it. Whereas when we're acting more generously or kindly or something, what can come with that and come from that is a sense that actually it doesn't need to be, I don't need to have my shield up in the same kind of way. There's an ease. To some extent it might come from, there's a kind of momentum. So if we're already in a state where we feel we're really unsafe and need to protect, we might act more out of that. But also acting in that way will create that very strong, especially if we act strongly, if we act very selfishly, it will tighten things up. So that we feel that there's it actually changes our experience of the world. As you say, there's a choice to sort of not just to act as if you were safe or unsafe, but to sort of actually create a world through the actions, which is experienced as safe or unsafe, or however we want to look at it. Yeah. What else? Anything else we noticed? Yeah.
I noticed with the negative memory, there's a sense of contraction, and with the positive memory, there's an expansion.
Right. Yeah. Put nice and simply. Yeah. So we notice this particularly on the sort of physical level. You might also notice it with our awareness. You talked about awareness kind of closing down in the first one. Both our sort of physical experience of contraction, there's a painfulness to that. Something being more contracted and more limited. It's a bit like being sort of trapped, like tied up or something, and feeling a bit sort of stuck. There's a tension with that that's unpleasant. Whereas if we're acting more sort of out of ourselves and we're more interested in others and helpful and so on, it's like that's loosening those ropes that are tying us or something. It's like there's an opening out in itself is pleasant. So that, you could look at this whole thing of karma as are things getting sort of tight and condensed and painful, or open and expansive. Yeah. Great. What else did we notice? Did we notice what effect it had in terms of our experience of our we've talked a bit about the self, but of the world around us and other people? What happened with that reflection between the two? Yeah.
Well, often when you do the generous thing, I remember that was obviously like a bridge to connection. And then the effect was that you made a friend, or you had a nice interaction with that person. And so it created a lot of like nice opportunities for both of you.
And what's that's good. What sense does that give you of, like, if you had to say the world is a something place, like what experience of the world would that sort of?
Yeah, you'd definitely be like, you'd feel very connected, and you'd say like that people are safe, and you'd be more trusting.
Right. Yeah, the world is somehow friendlier.
Yes.
When you're acting, when you're friendly, the world sort of seems to respond in a certain way. Both literally, you might find that if you're choosing to be friendly to other people, people are more likely to be friendly to you, and if you're choosing to be unfriendly, they're quite a lot more likely to be unfriendly to you as well. It's sort of obvious, but also on the level of how we experience it, how we interpret it, what this sort of cues or signals are that we see in the world around us, and then sort of use to build a sense of, this is a place where I'm at home or not, or whatever it is. Yeah. Any last thoughts from what we noticed? Yeah.
This was more of a challenge, but I found it hard to kind of like turn off the thinking mind that was doubting the intentions of the kindness, particularly when it, in this case, is like someone that I'm close to. I think like kindness towards strangers in some ways feels less fraught, and it does generate this expansion. When it's the same issue comes up with Madhavana, when you pick someone that you love but have a fraught relationship with, the kindness somehow loses that ease. And like I was just like not sure what to do with that sensation and feeling and thought.
Right. very interesting. Yeah, a couple of things you could say about that. I mean, one is that we can get a little bit. It's possible when looking at our behaviour to sort of assume the worst of ourselves, and get a bit into this whole narrative. Is there such a thing as a selfless act? I think that's a red herring. If you start getting into that, it's a red herring. Be much better off just acting selflessly as selflessly as you can, and trust that it will always be a bit imperfect, but it will have a positive effect. So to some extent, we might be getting a bit stuck in that. But I think there's also the sense that as you say, a lot of our actions are a bit mixed. Our motivations are mixed. And so we've done something really kind, but if we're doing it because we're kind of hoping that we'll get love and approval, or that they'll give us something we want in return, or whatever it is, it does slightly muddy it. The sense of the sort of the karmic effect, the sense of expansion and ease and so on, is not quite as clean or something, to the extent that our motivation is mixed. So that's just sort of that's interesting. As you say, if it's a generous act to someone you don't know, where you're not going to get anything in return, you're right. There is a sort of cleanness to that. So we can sort of investigate that and find out to what extent our relationships, and you might notice this in the Metabhavana, are more to do with what we get in return. But don't go so far as to sort of assume that you've not got a kind bone in your body, because I'm sure you do. Yeah. So I'll just say a little bit more about. I'll say a little bit more about karma. Well, anyway, just the first thing to say is that's it. You've experienced it. It's as simple as that. We know for ourselves that our actions have an effect on us. We know that if we're selfish, we don't feel good afterwards, and we know that if we're kind, we do. It is as simple as that. And all that the Buddhist tradition is trying to tell us is to pay attention to that and live our life according to that. And it kind of tracks, well, it gives us ways that we can do that, and ways to help, like this reflection in itself that we're studying tonight is a way of helping remember to do that. And it also, it helps us to sort of build on that and use the progression that gives in our life to sort of grow into something fuller and fuller. But the basic law itself, we know it already. So if we're sort of making it too complicated for ourselves, we just don't sort of need to. But I will say a little bit more give a little bit more sort of nuance to how we might understand karma, and then I want to kind of move on to talking a bit about what we do with it and make it a bit more practical. So the first thing is that the word karma is often interpreted as being, as meaning the sort of the rebound that you get from acting in a certain way. People talk about like instant karma, where you're rude to someone and then like a bird poos on you or something. And in a way, the Buddhist tradition would say the karma is the action. It's the being rude to someone. And the bird pooing in your head actually might have nothing to do with it at all. But the sort of the response that we were noticing, say, in our the karma was what we did. Then the Buddhist tradition has the word karma vipaka. Vipaka means something like fruit. So the fruit of that action is that we feel tight, constrained, whatever. It will also have fruits for the other person. They might feel upset. That might have there'll be fruits of that action. But the karma itself is just the action. It's what we do. It's the choices that we make and what we do. And it's intentional. So it's what is important is not what we do exactly. It's sort of what we it's the intention underneath it. So as we were just talking just now, you can do a kind act, but if you're hoping for something in return, it's not quite the same. It might even have a negative effect. We're sort of bribing someone or whatever. But also we could do things that are sort of, we could, swallow and therefore kill a fly, for instance. But if we didn't mean to swallow and kill the fly, it's karmically completely neutral because there's no intentional action there. So it's like the action needs to be willed. It's something that we've it's a thought or a bit of communication or an action that we've taken that is come from our that's got a sort of volition underneath it. And then that will have a fruit according to the nature of that volition. So if we're really trying to help, even if it doesn't quite work in the way that we intended, there'll be a positive karmic effect, and hopefully we can learn from why it didn't work in the way we intended. And I guess the other thing to say is, as we've been noticing, this is a natural law, and most of the way that we think about ethics and morality tradition tends to be to do with more like a kind of law of a different kind. It's the sort of legal model of the sort of courtroom where we go in, we've done something, and we're judged for it, which means that we're basically taking the sort of the crime or the sin or whatever it is that we've done, and we're taking that as a thing, and then there's a punishment for that thing that's sort of doled out. Yeah, so they're kind of separated. Similarly, a virtuous action and a reward that we get for it are kind of separated out. And what you need is a sort of lawgiver to basically say, you've done bad, here's what you get, here's your just desserts, or you've done a good thing, here's your pat on the back. So it's this sort of legal, sort of courtroom model, if you like. And in that, whether we're aware, like a lot of the time in a sort of post Christian culture, a lot of the time the sort of the judge in that is some shadow of a god figure. That was the function of a god, was to sort of judge us and decide what effects it would have after death, heaven or hell, all of that. Bhante Sangharakshita, who is our teacher here at the London Buddhist Centre, says something to the effect of the fact that makes for great drama, like great paintings and stories and epic poems and so on. This image of God as the judge and the Judgment Day and the St. Peter at Pearly Gates and so on. Great drama, but pretty poor philosophy. So there is downsides to splitting out the crime and the punishment in that kind of way and waiting for someone else to sort of enforce it. I was thinking to extend the metaphor a little bit. Often what we're looking for as a sort of as a lawgiver is the jury of the sort of the social group we find ourselves in. The sense that we act and we feel like we're judged according to what people think of us as a response. Which means we can feel if no one knows, it's fine. No one recognised it, but I might be sort of punished or excluded or something if I act in a certain way. And of course, that leads to a kind of conventional morality, which is basically about doing what's expected of us rather than what is sort of morally right on a more universal basis. So in some cultures that might be, doing things that are really not good for us, spiritually speaking, but that's just what's expected, that's the done thing. So karma is a law in a sense without a lawgiver in this sense. There's no external authority that is saying whether this is good or bad. Instead, the law kind of administers itself. It's a bit like gravity or something. There's no one saying, the apple has fallen from the tree, therefore I say fall to the ground. It's just it's just baked into how things are. The apple falls, the apple comes unattached from the tree and it falls to the ground, and that's just part of it's sort of the law looks after itself. It's just how things work. So this is just the same way. On the ethical level, on the level of actions and consequences, karma just works. It's just part of how things are, which is why the Buddha's not sort of telling us this is how things are or judging us for it. He's just saying, look, you can see for yourself, this is how it works. So there are sort of completely natural moral laws at play. So in a way, the sort of the locus classicus for this in the Buddhist tradition is the first two verses of the Dhammapada, which are some of the earliest sayings of the Buddha and best known as sayings of the Buddha. and I forgot my copy of the Dhammapada, but I'll try and remember it. So the first two verses are, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox drawing the cart. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. Yeah? So it's nice and direct. In a way, we've just seen that in our experience, haven't we? So a few things that's pointing out. The first is that the mind is of primary importance here. If all of this is coming out of the volition behind an action, then it's very, very important to notice what the mental states are that are governing what we do, including the things that we're thinking. Secondly, it talks in terms of a pure mind and an impure mind, which I quite like that in those phrases, pure and impure. But the more traditional ones, the ones we'll hear more frequently, are thinking of actions in terms of being skillful or unskillful. That's the language we'll hear more often in terms of our ethical behaviour, our sort of the karmic effects of things. So our actions are either skillful, which would imply that they are coming out of states of mind that are contented rather than sort of greedily grabbing after things for ourselves, that are loving, sort of coming out of that sense of connection with other beings, rather than acting out of hatred and sort of aversion towards others in the world, and coming out of wisdom, a clear seeing of how things are, rather than a sort of a delusion or even a willful ignorance of how things are. So basically, those where we are on that spectrum will dictate whether where we are on a spectrum in terms of where our action is coming from, by the volition that it's coming from. That will dictate whether it's how skillful or unskillful it is. And we're not sort of punished or rewarded for our actions. It's even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox, so there's the suffering following the impure thoughts. So the shadow that never departs, just like a shadow follows you around as you walk in the sun. So the happiness follows skillful action. So the sort of, in a way, the action itself is suffering, or the opposite of suffering. We experience it now, and there will probably be later fruits as well. We can't quite say when, but if we act skillfully or unskillfully, there'll be correspondent effects later on that we'll experience. Just a couple of other just little caveats to sort of give with this, to save any, because there's ways we can misunderstand this. One is just to say that, to reiterate, that karma isn't a whole story. So I talked about conditionality more broadly. Karma is one aspect of that. So we can't say, oh, I'm, suffering, therefore I must have been really bad and I'm being punished for it. Traditionally this exists within a framework of multiple lifetimes. So you can say, I've got a really bad lot in this life. Must be that because I've been awful in a previous one, or even worse, we can attribute that to other people's suffering. We can't do that. There's all these other layers of conditionality, just sort of like levels on which things are happening, that might lead to that. So we can't know what the causes are of our suffering or our happiness completely. All we can therefore do is just sort of patiently accept them. The fruits of karma are completely neutral. They're just things that we're receiving. We don't know quite where they come from. We probably don't know quite why we're experiencing the things we experience and having the life that we're having. but we can patiently bear it and then try and influence the thing that we can do, which is how we respond with the next action and the next one. And also, just to say that this is all operating at the level of me having a self that's separate from the world out there. And sometimes people will sort of question this. You get this with the metabhavana. You say, I thought Buddhism was saying that there isn't a self, but here I am wishing myself well. Well, all of this is operating within the common sense framework that we're used to exist within. And we need that, because in order for us to be an ethical agent in the world, we need to have a sense that, am I giving or am I taking from people out there? So we need to sort of use that framework. But the Buddhist tradition does take us beyond that. And it says that there are natural laws at play that can help carry us beyond that as well. But that practicing with karma, but trying to sort of align our actions more and more with the skillful and less with the unskillful, that will set up the conditions for other things to come into play. Things that will, like laws in a way that will draw us beyond ourselves. So, the last thing to say is it's always happening. This isn't just when we start practicing the Dharma that this is happening. It is happening all the time. We're constantly being shaped by karma. And what we are, the experience that we have, is largely is largely just shaped by how we've been and how we've acted. And that's true of others. That can be quite a sort of reflection to have, is just to look at other people and just see how, they're the fruit of they're the sort of outcome of all the actions that they've taken, and other things as well. But we sort of create the person and the sort of character through actions. I used to work in theatre and direct plays before when I started coming to the London Buddhist Centre, and you understand character through their actions. If you analyse a play script, the main thing is to notice what they're doing and why they're doing things. That's how you get to know a character, and that's how an actor will sort of get into that a lot of the time. And in doing so, that creates character. That literally corresponds. We are what we do, and we can see that more and more. So, but we forget, don't we? So in a way, this is all nice and clear. Hopefully we've got a sense of it for ourselves, but we forget. We know on some level that actions do have consequences, but we sort of give ourselves get out of jail free cards. That we sort of might tell a little lie and think no one's going to know. It'll be fine, and yet then later on we might get caught up in all of the sort of the follow up of trying to then maintain that lie so we don't get found out and proved as a liar or just embarrassed. So there'll be consequences of that. Or for me, things like, there comes a point in the night where I feel like, I don't need to go to bed on time. It'll be fine. There's something nice to do, or I want to read a book or play the piano or whatever it is. And I think, it'll be fine. And then the next morning I feel really tired and then regret it. And at some point, I've basically just forgotten or chosen to ignore the fact that my actions now will have consequences. And I wonder if you can think of are there other ways that you can think of that we do this or you do this, that you sort of, what are these sort of, how do we sort of wiggle around it? What reasons do we tell us to avoid this truth? Anyone?
I think sometimes we say like, oh, this thing is inevitable. I'm just part of this inevitable, like maybe bad thing. Yes. You create this story of a lack of your own agency. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm just part of a culture. It's a sort of poisonous culture or whatever, and I just get, everyone else is doing it.
So say a bin is overflowing.
Yeah.
And there's like crap around it.
Yeah.
You just might go, there you go. Like someone's going to have to clean it up. There's a pile of rubbish there. Like this is all just happening.
Yeah.
You might sort of recognise there's bad stuff happening, but kind of just dampen down your own role in it.
Yeah. We're forgetting about your own action within it. It's basically saying that
trying to avoid responsibility as well
Yeah.
for things.
Yeah, so we're avoiding responsibility, which is again of ignoring our own agency. It's basically saying the world's happening to me. The world's happening to me and I'm just kind of going along with it. And rather than thinking, no, what I'm thinking and communicating and doing has an effect. Yeah. Any more? Yeah.
To me, there's like a difficulty in assessing competing needs. Because like in the example you gave, so there's a need to go to bed and be like awake tomorrow at the right time. And then maybe there's a need to read that book, or like there's a part of us that like really need to play the piano, and then it's like trying to assess like which one's more important. Because we could also go to bed and regret that we didn't do the thing and be like, oh, maybe it's not that important. And back to like being grounded in awareness and be like very aware of like what matters.
Yeah.
Because in the moment it always feels like the needs of the moment matter more than the needs of tomorrow.
Yeah, so we prioritize the experience we're having now, which is often to do with pleasure rather than or avoiding the discomfort of having to lie in bed and not have a distraction and try and go to sleep or whatever it is. And yeah, as you say, but in each instance, it's not that there's a sort of a clear moral right that is thou shalt go to bed at 10:30 p.m. Like we need to remain sensitive in each individual instance to know what is the skillful thing to do here, what is gonna have the best result. We're always working that out, which is why it's skillfulness. Skillfulness implies it's a skill that we develop. We're learning how to do this. It requires an intelligence. It requires how we learn any skill, trial and error, a sort of responsiveness to what's working and what's not, etc. So yeah, I'll say a little bit about how we kind of work with karma. What can we do? There is this natural law. We're trying to align ourselves with it. What do we do? So the first thing I think is just that we can really just try and understand the principle itself. That's hopefully what we've been doing a bit of tonight so far. You can study this, you can read about it, you can bring it more into your mind and sort of try and ask questions of it and clarify things that are unclear. But as I was saying, ultimately it is quite simple at core. It doesn't need to be something too complicated. And the Buddhist tradition gives us precepts to work with. They're quite broad and they're quite universal, but they're sort of, in a way, they're sort of training principles. They're things that we can take on that will help kind of lead us broadly in the right direction. So let's just try and quickly do them together. So who can? We'll go through the 5 precepts. So the first precept in terms of its negative and positive formulation. Anyone? Not killing. And what's the positive equivalent of that?
Acting lovingly.
Yeah, deeds of loving kindness. Yeah. So we've got all the way from the extreme of harming someone to the point of killing them, completely negating their life, all the way to acting lovingly in their benefit. So there's a spectrum there. So we're trying to move from the unskillful to the skillful end of that spectrum. Great. What about the second precept?
No stealing.
Not stealing, not taking what is not given. And what's the positive?
Being generous.
Yeah, great. So again, another spectrum. Are we taking things for ourselves, or are we giving freely? We talk about open-handed generosity, just giving of ourselves. Yeah. The third one. We know it. And there's people. Sexual misconduct. And the positive. Stillness, simplicity, and contentment. So they don't necessarily correlate quite as clearly, but I think it's basically something to do with, grabbing at experience to the point of sexual misconduct, which might be sort of, I know it's talked in terms of rape and abduction and, infidelity, etc. Just going for what you sort of want versus and the harm that comes from that, which is it's a polar opposite to stillness, simplicity, and contentment. Not feeling like you need to sort of grab satisfaction from the world around you, but being able to be content. Yeah. Fourth one.
False speech.
Yeah. Untruthfulness, particularly. Yeah. speaking, lying, effectively, and the positive.
Truthful communication.
Yeah. So everything from, there's a scale of truthfulness, isn't there? And to speak truthfully is actually a really, really high bar, because we need to know what's true. We need to know ourselves well enough to really say what is true to us, all the way to a sort of coarse and damaging lie. And last one, the fifth one.
Intoxication.
Taking intoxicants, and the positive.
Mindfulness.
Right. So yeah, this is the quality of our awareness, basically. Either we're clouding our awareness through drink and drugs and distraction, or we're cultivating more and more awareness. So that's interesting that awareness has an ethical implication in itself. We're cultivating, it's working directly on the mind. This is the mental sort of aspect of it, creating a brighter, clearer, more aware mind, which in turn will affect all of our other behaviour as well. So these are broad principles in a way that covers. You could sort of take all of our ethical action and put it within that umbrella of those 5 precepts, and we might need to nuance it sort of further. But by understanding those principles and having those to mind and remembering those precepts and seeing if we can actively try and practice them, we've got a guide. There's a situation where it's like, oh, am I going to lie here or not? And then hopefully we can remember that. Am I going to have another glass of wine, or am I just going to not and enjoy my conversation with my friend, or whatever it is? There's some guidelines that we've sort of got there. And some of them are counterintuitive. We can so often think that we'll be happy when we have X, Y, and Z. And what this is saying is that you'll be happy when you give X, Y, and Z. That's going to be the thing that leads to happiness and satisfaction and a sense of feeling connected to others and so on. So it's slightly counterintuitive to what we might the sort of the way we might normally operate. So understanding these principles and reminding ourselves of them will be key to sort of slightly derail our more habitual ways of trying to be happy. So then we also need to kind of deepen our so it's understanding the principles, and then I'm thinking in terms of like deepening our awareness or deepening our sensitivity to the effects of karma. So as we've noticed already, through the exercise that we were doing, the inner compass or whatever as to what is skillful and what is unskillful, we've got it. It's innate. It's innate because it's a natural law. It's a natural law in the universe, and to the extent to which we're aware, we're affected by that natural law. So the compass is naturally going to point to true north in that way. So it's there. All we need, but much of the time, it's kind of covered over. It's covered over with stories about the fact that, someone else will do it. It's not. I can't really have an impact on that, or they deserved it, or though. I'll be kind to them, but not to those people, or whatever it is. We cover over the fact that we do have this innate sort of conscience, effectively. So we're trying to bring more awareness to that. And the reflection exercise we did is really good. You could keep doing that. It's worthwhile doing. And just reflect on your experience in that way. Something bothers you. You feel upset by something or whatever. Can you reflect on it in that kind of way and just notice, was there something that I did? Is there something that I'm doing here? Or is there something I need to sort of communicate to someone? Notice how we're feeling and what the effects of our actions are. But also I think we can learn from others. We can be sensitive to other people's experience. So we don't need to learn all of it the hard way. We don't need to make all the mistakes to know that we don't need to make those mistakes. That's why we've got these principles. We don't need to do loads of lying to realise that it makes us unhappy. And I think this is where I think like narrative's really, really important. Whether that's reading fiction or watching plays or films or whatever. I think an education in fiction in that way is really important. It's easy to think it's kind of useless. It's sort of partly important because it is useless. It's not got a particular purpose. But what it is doing is narrative is this thing happens and then that thing happens, and then that leads to that thing, and then that leads to that thing, all the way to the end of the story. And in doing so, we're getting to know cause and effect. We're getting to know what the consequences of actions are, and we're developing a sensitivity to seeing other people go through those sort of questions about what is it to be human and how do you act in the world. You're seeing other people work that out for themselves. So watching really good quality fiction or reading good quality fiction can be a moral education. It needs to be good quality because there are stories that are telling you this leads to this, and it doesn't quite, or that it's affected by the same kind of coverings that we might rationalise we might have for ourselves, that leads us to acting unskillfully, because it emerges out of the mind of an artist or a writer or whatever. So their mental states will kind of affect it, and their views of the world will affect it. But good quality fiction in that way will be freer of that somehow, and something of a more universal truth as to how things are, what the consequences are of actions will educate us and will sort of deepen us in some way. I watched at the weekend with a few friends Coach Carter, which is from the I think it's in like early 2000s. Basketball coach goes to sort of failing inner city school in Richmond in America, and he's like a strong disciplinarian, and he comes in and he's got a contract, and there are certain rules and there will be respect, and people, and like the students who are trying to all play basketball to a high level are going to be there on time, and they're also going to get a certain grade in school. They're going to have to keep up their schoolwork and things like that. And the one thing that's striking about him is that he does not bend on his contract. No matter what happens and how much pressure he's under, he just will not bend. And there is something, it's not a brilliant, it's great, it's a good film. It's not a brilliant film, but it's definitely a moral film. And one thing you do sort of notice in watching it is you sort of see, and it has a very positive effect, and you can see, wow, the sort of, what happens if you have real integrity? What happens if you really follow through on your moral intuitions? Because he's doing this for the benefit of the students that he's looking after. What happens if you really hold strong on that? And you kind of feel motivated by it. You see a positive example in that. We can do that with people around us as well, and people that we look up to. That can have a similar effect. But in short of that, we can read good books. So yeah, we're trying to just develop this responsiveness to life, really. And then what we can do is just to train. So we've developed that awareness, and then we can train to act more skillfully. And in order to do that, we'll need to get to know ourselves better, and that will require us to be quite honest with ourselves and recognise how we actually are. It will also, and it can really help if we're receptive to what other people say about us. And most of the time, people will try and avoid saying things to us. Sometimes they'll say it in a way that's unkind. And even though they might be really rude, and even though they might have their own part to play, it's well worth listening to what their experience of you is. If you can get over the reaction to it, it's well worth knowing. And if you're lucky, you'll have friends who will say those things to you in a way that is got your best interest clearly at heart. It's easier to receive if that's the case. But it might, particularly if it's a new experience, it might still not be easy to receive at all. Until recent, one of my good friends is called Sthiramanas, who used to teach on Dharma Night actually a little while ago, and he doesn't live in London anymore. But we lived together and worked together for many years, and more than pretty much anyone I knew, he always had things to say about me to me. And for a lot of the time, I would find that difficult, particularly early on. But even any time that there was something new, one of my first responses would be like, leave me alone. But what about you? What do you do? Etc. Finding some sort of way of wriggling out of the discomfort of having a truer perspective on myself and the effect that I have in the world around me revealed to me. Because most of the time we are a bit blind to how we are. In a certain sense, we know ourselves less well than everyone else. There are things we can't see about ourselves that everyone else can tell you in a moment. To have someone tell you some of those things can be, we can react, we can resist, but to then start to open to that, it's actually a very generous thing of him to do that, because it'd be much easier for him not to, and he's trying to help. And then we might have realised that we've got a particular working ground that's showing us there are particular things that we're working on. There's a particular way that we don't tend to align with these precepts, we don't align with karma, and we need to get to know what that is and then start to try and work on it. So, cruel question, let's get into pairs and see if you can talk to someone else about what you think that might be for you. What might be something, what's a working ground for you, what's a habit that goes against this law of karma, and what could you do about it? So we'll talk for just a few minutes, just see if you can articulate that to someone else. That's a skillful act in itself, just acknowledging it. Great. I was going to ask you about some of those, but that'd be really cruel, and B, running out of time. So I'll let you. You can remember what it is you're talking about and try and take that away. It's good to know what's a working ground, what's something that you're working with, and that might then develop into a slightly more of a kind of like a personal precept that's slightly more specific. If your issue is I don't know, being unfaithful to your partner or whatever, that might not be completely put in one that might not, it's slightly more specific than another precept, or I'm not going to go to the places where I feel tempted to cheat or whatever it is. I don't know why I'm using that as an example. But it's a good one. So, you might need to make it something more specific for yourself so that you're avoiding your own particular traps. So, just lastly, in a way, all of these reflections, you could talk about karma in lots of different contexts, but these reflections are very much in the context of developing a motivation to practice. The kind of things we're talking about, finding a working ground, doing your best with it, developing awareness. This is all the practice. This is all we're getting going in Buddhist practice by that point. So this is a reflection that's going to develop the motivation to do that in the first place. So just a couple of questions in terms of the sort of why we might work with karma in this way. So firstly, we could think of doing it for ourselves. We've seen in our experience for ourselves that one is pleasant, the other is unpleasant. So we could do it on the basis of that. And you could split that further, this is again one of those traditional lists, in terms of avoiding the suffering of unskillfulness. So even sort of fearing the suffering of unskillfulness, that can be a strong repulsion from acting in a way that will cause us to suffer. Speaking of infidelity, I can put my hand up and say I've never been unfaithful to a partner, but I did. There was a moment when I had a dream on a retreat when I was one of my first retreats, where in the dream I was unfaithful to my partner, and I spent the whole rest of this dream just sort of going around frantically trying to kind of cover it up, and then realizing that I was just going to have to tell her, and that was going to have all these consequences, and it was awful. It was such an unpleasant experience in the dream. And I woke up and realized, firstly, I realized that I'd never quite told myself that I would never cheat. I never said I'm looking for an opportunity, but I'd never quite, on some level, I'd never quite given up the possibility. Probably I didn't have the options. But anyway, I'd never quite given that up. But I sort of realised that, and I realised how awful it would be, like how painful that experience would be. So that was very motivating, and it enabled me to say quite definitely to myself that is not something I'll ever do, and I do really believe that. There's also so that's the fear of suffering, but there's also just the delight that can come from skillful action, and really learning to love that. learning to love the experience of acting skillfully. Sanghadharan was talking in his tea break announcement about rejoicing in merits and being on retreat, actually. And I've got an example of rejoicing in merits on retreat. So we were Sanghadharan and I were both on the team for our recent men's intensive retreat with a few others in the room. And there's something about being on retreat, like retreat conditions enable you to be skillful. Everything is sort of geared up for that. It's much easier to act skillfully, and we're cultivating awareness, and we're living as a community, and we're helping one another out, and so on and so forth. And something I find particularly about being on the team for a retreat like that is that you're building a really... we meet every evening as a team and just talk about the day, and there's a sense of we're doing this thing together, and you just really come to appreciate one another. And this, the main topic of conversation in those team meetings gradually becomes rejoicing in merits in the way that Sanghadharan was talking about. It's just natural outpouring of appreciation towards one another, which once you sort of left behind more of the cynical mind that is with you in London and are into the kind of flow of the skillful states in the retreat, just feels very natural. And, like a highlight for me was a moment on this retreat. I hope Sanghadharan won't mind me saying this, but there was a moment towards the end of the retreat. We were both there. There were a number of us on the team, but the two of us and our friend Aditya Bandhu, who's an order member around here as well. We've known each other for a long time, and we've lived together and worked together and are good friends. And there was this lovely moment on the one of the later nights of the retreat where a number of people just got into rejoicing in Aditya Bandhu. He's such a good man, Aditya Bandhu. He's very, very sort of upright and reliable and warm. He's just such a nice presence to be around. You just want to be around him. Anyway, these kind of qualities were being really rejoiced in. And I looked across the circle at Sanghadharan, who was tearing up at the sort of just listening to his friend being rejoiced in. And then I was tearing up watching my friend tear up at another friend being... and just like the whole experience, just like, this is so delightful. It's like, when you sort of have a happy cry at the end of a film. And it's just like you're just really moved by something just positive. Often it's to do with skillful action, effectively. You watch someone grow and act skillfully and you're just moved by it. And the experience is delightful, which is why we like a feel-good film. And learning to sort of develop a taste for that and feel like I want to be in context where that can happen. I want to act in ways that enable my mind to unfold down those particular channels. But we can also, so that's thinking of in terms of the effect for ourselves, but we can also think of it in terms of the effect on other people. So we've already talked about the humbling effect of recognising what our effect is on other people, ways that we behave that have certain effects, but also in terms of the positive effects that we can have on people as well. So not underestimating those, not underestimating the effects of trying to live out of value, trying to develop, qualities of generosity, of friendliness towards other people, of truthfulness, of kind of integrity, of whatever. All these kind of qualities that we're trying to develop through our practice. The majority of people are not exemplifying them in the world, and we want to live in a world where those values exist. And if we can exemplify them to some extent, that has a really big impact in itself, without any sort of particular sort of outcome in mind. Just demonstrating that has an impact. An act of kindness that we give, we don't know where that goes. If we positively affect someone's day and put them in a more open state of mind, and they then might sort of, if we're really friendly to someone, they're more likely to be friendly to someone else. We don't know where that stops. We don't know what the effect of that is. And if we embark on a life of practice, if we embark upon even just a period of intensive practice like a retreat, the cumulative effects of that practice, particularly when it's collective practice, particularly when it's people coming together to together develop these qualities and sort of bring them more into the world, we don't know the end of that. We cannot underestimate that. Any sort of change, any kind of political change, anything like that, needs to correspond to a change in hearts and minds, as we talk about it. So, like, you know, no matter how good our policies are, and we need good policies and a good government and so on, no matter how good they are, it will always sort of correspond to the general collective mental state of the people that are being governed. So working, developing our consciousness in that way, enabling other people to do the same, will have a much more far-reaching effect and create much more of a stable foundation for the kind of changes that we might want to see in the world. And I think this is where it relates, what I'm saying relates to the fourth of these reflections that Kusala we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. We've got Lokamitra coming next week, but we'll return to the series in a couple of weeks' time. And Kusala will talk about this tradition called the defects of samsara, the world as we know it and its impermanence, the things that we might sort of look for a sense of security and satisfaction in, relationships, jobs, status, property, whatever, are impermanent. They won't provide us lasting satisfaction, and you can't kind of grasp them at the end of the day. They're not quite a thing in the way that we think. Recognizing that means that we can sort of let go of that and start to put our confidence onto skillful action more and more. So in a way, that's partly why it's a flip side. It's like saying if we can't rely on that, well, we can rely on this. We can rely on how we act. That's what's going to determine our experience and the experience of others that come into contact with us. But I also think, for me, there's something that these two reflections combined has to say about how we respond to a world that is suffering and that seems to be getting worse. Things seem to be falling apart. We've got, you've got climate change. You've got species becoming extinct. You've got wars. You've got that seem to get worse. You've got, all of these things that we're all pretty aware of, and some of us are very preoccupied with. We really, really want to see those things change, and it's very easy to feel powerless in the face of that. I felt that very strongly when I came along here. I was sort of really looking into all these things and coming into this sense that I just don't know what we do about all these things. It's like there's too much. I don't know where to start, and we can feel like I need to do something. I need to do something with my life that's going to change it somehow and fix it and make it kind of all good again, or we can feel like there's no point in me doing anything because other people need to fix this thing. It's like there's no point in my actions that matter because other people need to sort of sort this stuff out. In a way, all of that is kind of put in perspective when you just reflect on the fact that is what the world's like. The world, there's always going to be suffering in it. There always has been. There's always been wars. There's always been, things that are good stop, like they go out of existence. They're like these things sort of roll on. These tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion that sort of fuel all the suffering. They sort of roll on, and they'll continue to roll on. It's not as stable as we think. Our society isn't as stable as we think, and it's easy to take that in a way that we panic and feel like I need to do something. Someone needs to fix it. But reflect and saying, well, it can't. It just doesn't work like that. It's just the nature of the world. But what does work, what does have an impact, is what we do. We are left with a very powerful response in the face of the poignant recognition of the fact that this isn't saying, by the way, that we shouldn't try and help these things, but the poignant reflection that ultimately we're not going to just find a magic solution. We're not going to fix it all. In the face of that, we can act skillfully. We can try and help as best as we can in the sphere of influence that we've got. We can try and help, even if that is not directly related to these issues, even if that is just to do with being a better and better friend to people. Don't underestimate that. we need that. We need people to relate to. We need people to sort of see us and understand us and feel like we're connected and not just some sort of isolated unit kind of going around getting and spending. So together these reflections can sort of sober us to how things are, and give us something definite that we can do, and not underestimate the effects of that. If we could develop through aligning ourselves more and more with the law of karma to the point where we become more and more like the Buddha, the impact of our person, the impact of just being in that way, would have seismic effects on the world around us. And every step that we go along that way, there'll be more and more. So don't underestimate the effects of your actions. So I'll just leave us with I'll just dim the lights and I'll just read 3 times the traditional verse reflecting on actions and their consequences, and then that will be the end of our class. I am the owner of my actions, heir of my actions. Actions are the womb from which I am sprung. Actions are my relations. Actions are my protection. Whatever actions I do, skillful or unskillful, of these I shall be the heir. I am the owner of my actions, heir of my actions. Actions are the womb from which I am sprung. Actions are my relations. Actions are my protection. Whatever actions I do, skillful or unskillful, of these I shall be the heir. I am the owner of my actions, heir of my actions. Actions are the womb from which I am sprung. Actions are my relations. Actions are my protection. Whatever actions I do, skillful or unskillful, of these I shall be the heir.